So yes, thank you all the speakers for some very good information sharing. My question is for Maddie. You know, she showed differences in feed, you know, pellet size versus a lactation diet. How important is the complexity of that diet that you're using for that purpose?
Yeah, so when it comes to creep feed and then weaning them onto a phase 1 diet, research has shown that it's best, if possible, to try to keep that diet as close to the phase 1 diet as possible. So ideally, you'd want that creep diet to be pretty complex. For that creep feeding study, both the pelleted diets were the exact same as the diet they were weaned onto, which we think was part of where we saw some of that effect as well.
Just to follow up on the blood sugar and the mortality, we could use the mic. Okay. So since you're up, in the part of your presentation where the blood sugar and the mortality were correlated, any thoughts on trying some insulin or something like that? That was really shocking. Out of your whole presentation, that was really surprised me.
Yeah, that was one that was shocking for us too. And as we were in the barn taking blood glucose levels, the intern actually said to me, he's like, with these high levels, does it have to do with stress? And so I've read some papers more on the human side with patients in the ICU, et cetera. And so glucose levels can spike under times of extreme stress. So that could have been what we were seeing there, but that could be an opportunity. I think it's still, we don't quite understand why. So, I mean, that's something we've talked about, but I don't know for certain.
Hey, Maddie, over here. While you're up, so 2 questions for you. One, on your pre-wean, post-wean series of trials looking at different processes, you presented the weight loss changes within the first 3 and 7 days. What were the impacts on total nursery mortality and closeout performance?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Okay, so first starting with mortality, those 3 studies were conducted at K-State. So mortality was minimal. We lost a pig or
Healthy.
2 per experiment. So that would be something that you'd want to, and we've talked about it, especially with the enrichment cubes, because that's one of the ones where we saw the greatest with pigs that lost weight. And so taking that to a commercial setting in order to capture mortality data. And so we didn't follow those pigs through finishing. We only have nursery performance. Body weight was not different at the end of the nursery, but that's another thing that we've talked about is, so it's great that we can help them reduce the number of pigs that lose weight after weaning, but what does that actually mean long term? So
then my second question, the first couple of studies you guys did the gruel feeding work with Holden's, and it's great data. One of the biggest challenges, and we deal with it in our system and communicating mortality data to our production staff, you presented total removals, so mortality and pigs just removed from test. There's a big percentage of pigs that when I pull them and give them specialized care, they still leave the barn. Yep. So do we as an industry and as researchers need to do a better job of following those pulled pigs' outcome after they leave that trial pen? Just a food for thought.
Yes, 100%. And that was something that we didn't communicate well enough with those trials because that was our intention, but the data didn't get captured. So.
That's a very good point, Josh, and I think there's areas that, and what we've tried to do in some of our subsequent ones is tagging those removals so that we can actually track them on whether they die or not, because what we attempt to do is to pen them by treatment, and what we find out is they don't stay in the pen or they don't go to the pen that we thought they were going to, and so tagging them is a way that we've been able to capture some of that in subsequent trials.
Just
a comment, question?
Yeah, back here, Mike.
Oh, okay.
Just a comment or thought on the blood glucose. Those more highly stressed animals, I'm thinking probably have a higher cortisol production, which has an inhibitory effect on insulin, which is not going to allow blood glucose to get driven into the cell. Thus, you see these elevated blood glucoses. Probably that might be a mechanism that you might want to look at.
Well, and that was one I said, I don't know if for Dr. Murray or for any other veterinarians. The other thing that we were hypothesizing about some of those pigs, it's a relatively small portion of the population, as Maddie talked about, and wondering whether we're really, those are some of the pigs that are getting into organ shutdown, and whether we've got some spilling happening, that they're that close to, when you run into that, and 100% of them died. Yeah.
Maddie, I have a question since you're up. When you look at pigs that lost weight, did you have any data that suggests if they came from a large litter or a small litter or multi-paris or gilt litter piglets, does that have an impact or interaction with your fallout pigs?
So I would have that data if I went back and looked at it. That's not something I've looked at yet, but that data would be there to look at. And same thing, we quantified anything that lost weight as anything that was below 0. So some of those pigs could have lost 0.2, whereas others I know for a fact lost 2 pounds or so. So trying to understand percentage of body weight loss would be another good one too.
So while you're up, you in your take-home points were focused on the 10% bottom-end pigs, but then in your data you showed that the heaviest pigs, a higher percentage of the heaviest pigs lost weight. So how do you define the bottom 10%? Is that the 10% that lost the most body weight, or how do you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good point. So I think where I was going with that point is a lot of times, I don't know how to answer that one. I would probably define, so you'd almost have to define that bottom 10% of the population not at placement, but rather it's that percent of the population that gets pulled and placed into pull pens. Yeah, so which ends up being a mix of pigs in small pens, a mix of pigs from the general population, and so it's really those pigs that are in those pull pens.
How much of the post-weaning weight loss is water loss versus lean loss?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know, but that is something to consider, yeah, for sure.
I've got a question for Emmeline. I know you also did some work with ropes without the donuts, and I know you didn't talk about that today, but could you give us just a little bit of an update on what you found with providing enrichment by hanging ropes in the farrowing house and then in the nursery?
Yeah. So first, one of the cool things about the enrichment we did is that even in the nursery trial that I presented, is the biscuits. I gave you a 98.4%. 24 hours later, the biscuits were gone. But actually, an hour later, before I left the barn, a lot of those biscuits, I think it was closer to 70% of those biscuits were gone within an hour or two. So what's cool about that is then what's left in the pen is just the rope itself. So you've got the enrichment, they've ate that, they've got that gone. But we still got the rope hanging on the feeder, and we were still seeing the pigs interacting with the rope. We didn't do, as I mentioned, we had just an hour of behavioral observations, but just coming into the barn and seeing the amount of interaction on the rope itself was still high. So just having something over there was still drawing them towards the feeder, increasing interaction. And then for the pre-weaning trial that I did, I'm talking about that in the next session, I think in the other room, so I'll be back over there. But we actually, for that one, we're really interested in the crushing window, so we put that in the first day, second day after they were farrowed, which was kind of an interesting, slightly different area, but still ropes, because something hanging in the pen is going to draw their attention more than something that they can't really see down at the ground level, per se.
Thank you.
For Emmeline? For Emmeline. Yep. So how much, you did the jam and you did the semiochemical, the pheromone type thing. How much room for improvement on attractants do you think there is? Not only for the things hanging in the pen, but for like the cubes that were started in the, with the sow, like how much, Do you think that we can do things to make those attractants better so that we can really entice the piglet to eat?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is definitely yes. Like, how much do we really know about what each age of pig is attracted to? It changes a lot for the newborns versus a nursery pig versus a finisher pig. And Maddie did some of that, transitioning from the post or the pre to the post weaning environment. And there's just a wide variety of things. So I did a literature review trying to figure out what kind of attractants do I want to use. And it's kind of all over the board. So the jam thing that I use is like, okay, nursery pigs love sweet things, but there's a lot of different sweet things out there. So is jam the best option to pick, or was there just a sucrose solution? Or there's just so many options out there that I think looking into that is valid, because what we're really trying to do is just what do they like, and can I figure out what they like the most, and it's going to help them the most in attracting them towards feed or enrichment or anything like that.
Turned it off. Okay. Just really want to thank you for all the hard work weighing individual pigs to do this stuff, because in the past we like to look at numbers quick and easy, and we don't. When you look at the average for pigs, average daily feed intake, average daily gain, you have to weigh the individual pigs to find the ones that are losing weight, to find these sorts of differences that we need to look into. And so I really appreciate all the work you students and faculty are doing.
Just a note on that preference, a number of years ago there was a vaccine company that was developing an oral vaccine, and they needed a certain duration of drink and a certain quantity of drink, and what they settled on was strawberry. And we actually did a water-soluble strawberry flavoring in the water, and were able to increase intake of water, which subsequently increased intake of feed. So berry seems to be a good candidate.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know there was one study that I looked at, and they looked at like red fruit flavors in general. So agreeing with that, it's for some reason, whatever is in strawberry and red fruit, there's been multiple studies that have seen that they like that.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work done, and I think it maybe actually follows up with that a little bit. But you know, I would argue getting into barns, dehydration is sometimes maybe even a bigger issue than feed intake or lack of feed intake. And so is there any work being done to look, you know, those day 2 to 3 fallouts are probably dehydrated pigs a lot of times. And then while I have the mic, a question for Maddie would be, you know, there's different mat feeding trials in the past, and obviously recently have you looked into just initiating pen activity versus mat feeding? Because a lot of nurseries don't have mats, and when the producer sees mat feeding, they say, I can't do it, I don't have a mat, right?
Yeah, so your first question on water intake, there's not recent data that I'm aware of on that. It has been done, but I think it's like 1980s, that shows that water intake's pretty low, yeah. So not that I'm aware of, nothing in the works, but it is an area to look into. Just from observations too in the barn, granted, you're standing in a pen of 90 pigs, you can't see them all drink water, but I was surprised how quickly I saw pigs go to water in the barn, but I still think it is an issue, but it's just hard to understand, is it a water issue, is it a feed issue, how to quantify that. But as far as nursery activity, actually we did put together a protocol to do a trial on looking at what if we just walked pens every 2 hours for an 8-hour shift versus a 16-hour shift versus a 24-hour shift. And so that would be just walking in a barn, walking down and back each pen every X number of hours, because I think there is something there that's, maybe it's not the feed, maybe it's just the fact that you're in there, because every time you get in there to gruel or to mat feed, you are stimulating that pig to get up and move around. So that's a protocol we have available if anyone wants to latch onto it, but it's 24-hour care is not always fun. So
One of the things that we've talked about, and it's easy to define, is finding the bottom 10%. One of the things that's frustrating for us nutritionists and barn takers, or caretakers, is you walk in the barn and it's the biggest pig that you weaned that died. Annalise, in your observations, did you see any interaction between weight of the pig and the enrichment ability or getting into the feeder of those small pigs compared to the big pigs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I think we haven't looked at yet, but we are continuing on this project. And like I said, there's future work planned for it. And it's an important question that we want to consider. I can anecdotally say, like going into the pens, oh, perhaps when you're watching video, you see, oh, it's this pig. This pig is coming up and doing things over and over and over again. And I didn't necessarily myself see it was a big pig versus a small pig every time, but that doesn't mean that trend isn't there if we were to actually take the time and look specifically at that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This might be a question for Dr. Murray as well. In the industry, we basically are doing a lot of vaccination at weaning because it's the convenient time to pick up that pig. It just seems that when we're talking about focus of future research, I think as you challenge that pig's immune system, all of a sudden dropping at weaning, and we think they're going to come to a nursery after traveling how many hours on the boat to get to your farm, then you're hoping to get to water and everything else, and here these pigs a lot of times go in and just lay down because they just got their immune systems being activated. They just did a long road trip. They're tired. So it's kind of like, how do we, and I'm just curious if you all have looked at it on that amount of doses we're giving, the different vaccines, and sometimes I wonder about the adjuvants used in the vaccine. Does that to stimulate the use or the immune response? How much is that knocking down the pig, and should we look at different impacts of that?
Yeah, so we would do, the majority of our vaccines would be the day prior to weaning for that reason. So then that way the pig can kind of get over that. Also, a lot of farms have staging rooms, so we'd be vaccinating them before weaning, but their weaning is into the staging room. So it's a low stress, staying on farm. They would have, our farther out farms, like coming from Indiana, for example, the minute they arrive, they all drink, and they will drink, eat, and go lay down. So then for us, we haven't seen that as an issue. In the past, though, where we have had struggles with that, usually that's what it is we're up against a younger wean age, and we're pressed on age. So we kind of are forced to have to give the shot the day of weaning, and you're right. I mean, you'll see that they're lethargic, they don't want to eat, they don't want to drink. So yeah, I think that's real.
My question's for Maddie. A lot of times when you go in the barn, producers and field staff, they want an elaborate demonstration of how to make the best gruel. Yeah. And I saw in there a little bit of your ratio, and I think sometimes we kind of think hydration is important, but too many times we go in the barn and we see the gruel feeders just full of water. So what is the proper gruel ratio?
That's a question of all questions. So just from observations, and it's going to depend on pen size, how many gruel feeders you have, how many pigs you have, but what I noticed is when you gruel feed, the first thing that those pigs are interested in is they'll go over and just suck all the water out. So then you get left with mush, and as long as you have enough pigs in the pen that are interested in the gruel, they'll go back and eat it, and the goal is to have it eaten within 30 minutes. You don't want to come back 2 hours later and see feed that's starting to smell and have flies all over it. But from a consistency standpoint, I think it's easy to say we need to go from more liquid to more solid, but realistically that's really hard to do because after 3 days, those pigs learn. When you enter that pen, you're gruel feeding them. And so they're on top of you, they're in the feeder. You barely can see what you're putting in the feeder because they're already attacking it. So I think more liquid is better, and to try to get less liquid as you gruel feed over a longer time point is clearly the best thing to do, just because you don't want them to be fully reliant on the gruel, because I think there is another weaning period that happens when you take away the gruel. But I don't know if we know the ideal consistency, and there's another opportunity for a trial. When you're thinking about gruel feeding, there's 100 different ways to do it, just like mat feeding, just like a lot of these different things. So.
On that, Maddie, do you have a max number of days in your professional opinion it should be?
The max number of days. I don't think you need to go more than 14 days, unless it's a sick or fallback pen that those pigs are starting to wither up and they're not eating much. I can see leaving something in there longer, but those, for the most part, those healthy pens of pigs that are getting it, that are considered either small or general population, I think you could do it for a week, get it done successfully, and then you're good to go.
Any comments on the whole gruel feeding area? I think those are good questions, and I think that's one of the reasons we did a little bit of this, is because there's not any information certainly published anywhere on really how good, what it really does. And we've done some trials in the past where gruel feeding general populations, we ended up reducing performance in some of our trials, and so you want to be careful with overdoing things for sure.
And I see a lot of systems that have a gruel pen and then graduate out of that gruel pen. Once the pig gets belly, it's graduated into a dry feed pen, and you wonder sometimes about the social disruption of that. Once you have that pig up and running, an opinion?
As far as if we should move them or not?
Should we be graduating those pigs, or should they stay once you get them established?
I think everyone does it differently, so it's so hard to know, because I think it's probably best to leave them once they get established, but I mean, if they're a good, healthy, full-belly pig in there with a bunch of skeletons, then maybe it's not the most beneficial thing. I don't know. It's a tough question, I guess. I don't.
Here, Paul. Is this on? Yeah. So to follow up on the gruel question, the focus is always on the type of gruel that's used, right? We want this special fancy attractant. So my question to you is, have you looked at using gruel of just taking feed out of the feeder and grueling with that so that those pigs then are accustomed to the feed, so when you try to transition them back to the feeder, is there a difference in the type of gruel? Or is it more around the process of grueling and getting those pigs separated and having access to the gruel versus what's in it?
Yeah. So for this trial, that's what we did, is we took feed out of the back of the feeder, and we just did that in water. So nothing fancy. I think it depends. If you're gruel feeding general population, just the feed out of the back of feeder is plenty good. And I think we looked at different protocols for different systems, and everyone does it so different. And there are systems where their set protocol is you're doing the fallback sick pens, and so because it's that population of pigs, they're adding Restart as an example, or something that helps it smell better and attracts them to it. But I think in general, the pigs that are attracted to gruel are just going to be attracted to gruel. But there is a population still that could care less about the gruel. So.
Yeah, and that's an important finding, because you can save bringing bags on farm, and you can get better execution if they can just take feed out of the feeder, and if you got data to show that there's no advantage of those special products coming in. So since I'm on Deb, I actually have a question for you on your whitewash, and I've always wondered this one. So I saw on your picture you actually had the wet-dry feeders, the tube feeders. And I've often wondered, when we do the whole whitewash barn, because I've seen this in our barns too, then you look at those tubes, and you look at the inside of the tubes, and you can see that the mold's still bound on inside tubes. Or you have the conventional feeders that actually have the extended tubes on them. Do you have a process around the feed and the feeding components themselves to get clean? Or is that not a concern when we have these E. coli breaks on sites?
Yeah, we have not done anything special other than like most of our sites now would be just the big dry feeders. So we haven't really done anything special on those. I can tell you though, I mean, we have had some success as of late with just whitewashing, parasiting lines, getting everything clean. And then we actually switched that site to rural water, but we're able to get rid of one of the virulent F18 out of that site. So we didn't do anything special, like, those feeders would have been tipped upside down, washed, that sort of thing. I do have a comment though, just in regards to gruel and mat feeding. So keep in mind that there's only so many employees and so many hours in a day. And so what we've found is that if you push that to be 14 days of gruel mat feeding, they're in there doing that and they're walking by the nice big frame pig that's starving out or needs a shot or needs to be pulled. Right, so like it's a balance. So that's what we've seen is like why do we gruel them? To get them to eat the feed. So we do it for a limited time to get them transitioned. And same thing with floor feeding because we want them to not be focused on that. We want them to be focused on the gen pop, not spending all their time on the bottom end.
I want to follow up on the water line cleaning. Deb, could you just go through the process, or how do you actually go about the cleaning process? Because I think that is a bigger problem in the industry than what a lot of people realize.
Yeah, so what we do is basically like you'd empty the lines completely. So you'd go unhook your medicator or whatever, open the valve, go to the end of the barn, open the line, drain everything out. Then you'd use a trash pump, and then you'd mix up your Parasite mix. So for like an average wean to finish barn, you'd probably use about 1 3/4 gallons of Parasite and about 30 gallons of water. You pump that in, basically sort of prime the lines, and then once it gets to the end and starts coming out, then you just start shutting lines off. And then we'll usually trigger the nipples with a couple gate rods. You just kind of cross them, and it'll keep them triggered, and it'll bleed down. That sits in the lines for 24 hours at least, minimum. And then to come back the next day, some of the sites, they'll just pull all the nipples right off the bat because you know it's going to be bad, so they'll just pull them and they have a bucket of new ones that they'll replace. Other sites, if we've done it on a regular basis, they don't necessarily have to pull the nipples, but then it's just going through and repeating the process of triggering the lines, bleeding the lines, getting all that out. But you sort of anticipate if you've never done it or if it's been a while since you've done it, you're going to plug nipples. So just know that going in and get them cleaned, which probably they need to be cleaned anyway, or replaced. So it's a good time to do it.
Thank you.
My question would be for the enrichment tools, depending on what diet you started on, hanging the ropes over the feeders. Starting with pellets, Mike, you know, we've done trials on pellet fines and stuff, removing pellet fines and how that would hurt starting a pig. Would that create more pellet fines, or is that something you look at in the future?
Yeah, I think a good question. Like what Connor's talking about is we've done trials with pellet quality and removing fines and that getting the fines out of that trough, increasing feed intake and helping pigs get started on feed. And obviously pellet quality becomes pretty important. And part of the reason why some people have moved to crumbles in a mixed diet in some of those stages to get away from some of that problem. But I think your point about whether the enrichment would create fines and I don't. That's a good question. I don't think it's going to be a huge problem. I mean, we're talking the enrichment that Maddie did with the large cubes. It was putting I don't know how many cubes did you put in the feeder pan a day? About 7 cubes in the pan, and it amazes me with some of these enrichment and socialization things that honestly, as a nutritionist, I didn't give it much thought for a long time, and now as we're getting into this area, you can getting those pigs to socialize and to have some play aspect does draw them to the feeders, and we got to figure out how to do that in a convenient way, an easy way for people in the barn that we can do it without a lot of extra cost to get there. But I do think we need to think about that, whether it be feeder design or what we're doing with how we present the feed to them. Kyle?
Deb, you talked a lot about rural and well water. What mortality difference do you see between the rural and the well water, and how do you look at that economically to make that decision when you may or may not have to spend a lot of capital to get the water line? You know, maybe the rural water only comes so far and you've got to do the rest of the capital investment to get into your barn. What do you see as the value there?
Yeah, so the problem is we don't have very many rural water sites, so our N is really small. But typically there'll be at least 1% lower mortality, sometimes 2. We've seen it with a rural water site, let's say breaks with PD, and let's say they're wean pigs on arrival. I can tell you in that situation, it'll be a minimal impact. Like they do really well. And versus your poor water site, so then you already have that as a challenge, and then you have a viral challenge on top of it, and then you're going to see kind of that 8 to 10% mortality. So just we haven't that's a tough part, right? Is we have a limited number of sites that are on rural water, so we just don't have a good way to really compare that. But we've even, like with our virulent F18 strains that we've seen that don't respond to vaccine, we can't treat, that sort of thing. We have yet to have a problem on a site that's on rural water year-round. They just don't have a problem. So I think it's a bigger impact and a bigger difference than what we give it credit for. But you're right, it can be incredibly expensive. Even if you're near a hookup, it's 15 grand, and that's if it goes by the driveway. And then you have your ongoing fees on top of that. So we appreciate that. There's a cost to it, and if you're nowhere near one, then you're going to go way up from there. You might be 30,000 plus just to get hooked up. So we know that, but then you start adding up your costs on your pigs and your mortality costs, and it's like, well, I could probably pay for that.
Yeah, on the topic of the line cleaners, is there a reason you guys chose Parasite versus, acid or ProxyClean? Is there a specific advantage, or?
We just had the most experience with that, so that's an acid and a peroxide mix from my understanding, so you're sort of getting multiple benefits more than just a straight acid, so that's kind of why we went with it, but yes, I'm sure there's definitely other options that will work too.
It was excellent discussion. So I appreciate all the questions, and we want to transition a little bit to talking about some future research. And again, this is one of the areas you can we certainly want to open up for a discussion on it. Or we have the blue cards on your chair if you want to jot down some of the areas that you think we should be doing some research around mortality on in the nursery area. Please do that. If you're comfortable putting your name and phone number so we can follow up on it, we'd appreciate that. Or if you want to be involved in some and want us to work with you in particular barns, we're certainly open to that too. So any comments from terms of research areas that as we're looking at the presentations you think we need to get into? We've already got a few of them out here from the discussion. But.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sure a personal belief that I've had for quite a number of years now. We know the individual impact of birth weight on mortality. We know the individual impact of birth order, right? We know these things individually, but then the comment was made earlier, then we look at the average, right? If we would tag every pig at birth and we would record events, you would create a medical record for every pig. If we would record treatments, if we would record pulls, right? There's been a lot of discussion about bottom end pigs. That's an assessment based on wean weight, or perhaps wean age if you know it, right? It's almost immaterial to the performance of that pig. If we would actually spend the time and the effort and the money, and I understand the barrier to entry being tag cost. Everybody says that, right? And I've said it myself. It would revolutionize how we raise pigs. But we don't do it because we're afraid to spend $1 or $1.50 a pig to put tags in their ears. And instead, we spend a whole lot of time and effort and money chasing what that pig looks like at weaning. I just think we're, as an industry, there's a lot of effort being put into this time, in these couple days, and we got to do something materially different, folks. I mean, we do. Yep. And I just think we're missing it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And now we do have the technology today that we can do exactly what you're talking about. And I know there are some systems that are starting to do that. We need to continually collect that data to see if, what values we can pull out of it. That's a very good point.
Yeah, good comment, Scott. Kind of to dovetail on the theme of materially different. I really don't know. Do we know anything about ventilation rates and ideal set points and microenvironments? What's it been? Stan Curtis's stuff from the Mike. I don't know. You'd know better than I would. But 70s and 80s, and have we really done anything since then to really define and refine ideal humidity, CFM requirements, set points, those sort of things? Yeah. I don't think we know. we guess, quite frankly, I think.
Yeah, even the ideal temperature for these different body weight pigs, with the different body fat that they have today versus the past, we really don't have much information on it. You're exactly right.
Just to follow up on those comments, you know, I think some of Maddie's work showed it was a combination of pre-weaning, you know, intervention and post-weaning in combination appeared to give the better result. And then tying together the enrichment, you know, you looked at the enrichment in the nursery, but preparing that pig for the stress of weaning is maybe an area of investigation with nutritional enrichment or something other than a barren crate, you know, in some of the reading I've done in the past too, just to help prepare that pig for the stress that's coming with weaning.
Thank you. John. Other comments? Jeremy? Right behind you.
Yeah, so general question on observations from years ago when we were dealing with the failure to thrive stuff, and I know, Mike, you got involved with that with Steve Henry, and we had done some stuff with Adam Moser at NC State, and we were struggling with that, and so we looked at a study where we weaned pigs and we had different groups, and we had actually fasted pigs. Provided them water in a pen, but no feed for basically a weekend. Weaned on Thursday and came in on Monday and looked at pigs that were not affected, pigs that were fasted, and then pigs that had this classic failure to thrive sort of activity, which is hard start pig, however you want to call it, right? And so those pigs lost more body weight than the fasted pigs. So, and they had feed available to them. We don't know how much they ate, but so even fasting a pig didn't create the same level of problems as we had with these hard to start, failure to thrive pigs or whatever. And whether that was a genetic issue or a health issue, et cetera. But part of the interesting thing that Adam saw was there was a difference in using the oosing chambers on intestinal integrity. In addition to that, histopathologically, there was a change in the enterocytes, the physical conformation of the enterocytes in failure to thrive pigs versus fasted pigs versus unaffected pigs. So the question was, as those pigs came in that way, or maybe they developed that way, was there prior insult in the lactation period? Were they just genetically predisposed to that? Was it something that developed in that pig versus not? And so linking that physiological piece to what we're seeing in these pigs that just, you know, some percentage of these pigs you just wonder, they're just not going to. They don't have the mechanism to transition to feed and gain that nutrition at a rate that gets them over the hump, right? And could you take these pigs and put them in an ICU and make them survive? I don't know, maybe. But in our world, they're not going to make that transition. So just thoughts on trying to understand that mechanism.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, and I think some of Adam's work has been really good for us, and I mean he's taught us when, you know, the wean age issue and why those pigs are fundamentally different, and your example of why the failure to thrive pig is fundamentally different, and I think we need to, yeah, with some of these pigs that are these fallouts that are is there something physiologically wrong with them versus they just haven't decided to eat feed. It's a very good point. Yeah.
To kind of echo Dr. Stellick's message, I mean, I think we lose a lot from the sow farm when they move to the nursery or the wean to finish barn, you know, and I don't know if there's research within that, or this statement, but to be able to identify a scour litter at day 3 in the crate and be able to say, okay, keep track of this litter day 1 in nursery to be able to treat them better. I truly believe, I think we have good people out there wanting to take care of pigs, but they get no information upon entry into the barn at that end of the production. And then I would just echo the ventilation. I mean, we do a lot of work and recommendations in that area, and we don't have updated information. I know it's costly and difficult trials to accomplish, and I would add gases to that list, because I think we're starting to get the ability from a relatively cheap enough cost to measure things like humidity and gases on a consistent basis and be able to set our ventilation rates according to those things.
Good comments, thank you. Okay, over here.
What about studying microbiome in some of these different pigs? Where are you with that? What are the plans to study microbiome? Because I think Deb points out a good thing in her talk, the difference in those microbiomes, we know that affects the immune system of those pigs. So.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think Deb gave some excellent examples of the microbiome and what you may be able to do with that. The struggle on the nutrition side is that we've done some of those trials, and trying to interpret it at the end of the day yet is we still don't know exactly what it means to shift some of that population, whether it's good or bad. In all honesty, there are some of those bacteria that it certainly appears that it's helpful if you can shift them a certain direction, but the things we do production-wise so overwhelm the changes in microbiome from what we do with the diet is where it really gets frustrating is we can affect the microbiome before weaning, and then the weaning process itself shifts it so far that anything we did previously disappears, and that's the part that getting it to stay with them long term. We need to continue doing research in that area for sure, and as we get more tools, we'll be able to hopefully understand it better. That's a good point. Other areas, comments? Up here.
Along the lines of the comment about the intestinal health and the integrity of the gut and the morphology of the enterocytes, so we know that there are a lot of things that can improve intestinal integrity, things like short-chain fatty acids, zinc, and is there any research that you guys are thinking about and teasing out when to apply some, I don't know, products or things? Should it be in the before weaning? When can we have the biggest impact on that intestinal integrity? And are you guys thinking about doing any research in that area?
I'm not sure if we've got the data to answer that, what you're asking, because you're right. That's the intestinal integrity, and goes back to what Dr. Pittman was commenting about. Is getting into the biology, what's going on at the gut level with these pigs. There's certainly we don't know whether with these nutritional strategies whether we're going to influence that or not. We know that certainly amino acids we can influence it, but in terms of whether that pig eats feed or not, how much impact we have on that turnover. We know the type of feed makes an impact on it, and that's where some of the liquids and the gruels help with that initial transition and shove it out later. But then you still have to go through those intestinal changes at some point in that pig's life. But they deal with it better when they're older, and so all those things that work towards that, we know there's advantages to taking them to older ages before we make that onslaught onto the intestinal lining. But it's how to make that happen in commercial production is always the continual battle. John?
Just to contribute to some of the comments already made on ear tagging individual pigs in this microbiome, there's a little bit of work I've seen relating to some micronutrients in particular. How the sow was fed, perhaps having a greater impact on the progeny, and some work done in Canada by Jacques Mott looked at that versus supplementing the pigs, and some of the maternal influence outweighed what you did to the pig, and so the talk about colostrum and all those other things. I think into Chad's comment about parity, looking at the influence of parity of the dam and those things, I think it's hard work to do, but I think we need to do more to understand all of that complexity.
We're seeing some of those same things. I mean, we can, some of the yeast products, you can look at a number of different areas where there's benefits or impacts by what you do to the sow on the piglet. We still need to, understand long-term all the way to market, and that's where, tracing these pigs to know how long-term those effects are becomes really important. I think we're going to have to shut off the discussion. We had an excellent discussion, but I want to allow you to get to break time into the next session. But thank you all and I want to thank the speakers one more time for their help this morning.